It all started when I woke up to the sound of someone hammering on my apartment door. That was only the first fright I got that night though. Heart pounding in my chest, I grabbed the bat I kept underneath my bed and headed towards my door. The first thing I did was look through the peephole to make sure it was not anyone sketchy. I was surprised when I was greeted by the sight of one of my neighbors. She looked completely terrified, and she was covered in blood too. I could already see through the peephole that her face was a mess. As I opened the door, she ran inside and started begging with me. "You gotta get me out of here. My boyfriend is trying to kill me." I asked her what happened, and she just interrupted me and said something like, "There's no time. Please, just get me out of here. I swear to God, he'll kill you too just for helping me." That was what sent me into a straight-up panic, because if this guy was willing to beat up his girlfriend that badly, Lord knows what he'd be willing to do to me. I grabbed my car keys, ran downstairs with the girl following close behind, jumped into my car, and took off into the night. I remember asking her if she had anywhere I could take her, like a friend's or a relative's or something. She said no, and the best thing for us to do would be to drive to a motel so she could call the cops from there. That's exactly what I did. I drove us to a motel and booked a room as well. The clerk was obviously just as concerned as I was. All it took was to explain that her boyfriend had tried to offer, and they immediately suggested we call the cops right away. The girl, whose name I didn't know at this point, I just knew her as the neighbor, said she'd go up to the room and call them, then asked me to get her some ice from the ice machine so she could deal with the swelling on her face. When I got to the room, she said the cops would be there ASAP. She took the ice, put it on her face, and burst into tears. I tried my best to reassure her, telling her she was safe and all that sort of stuff. When she finally calmed down, I asked her what had happened back at her apartment. She told me her boyfriend was abusive and she'd been planning on leaving for a while. That night, she'd finally got the courage to announce it to him. She said he walked into their bedroom to find her packing a bag, and not long after that, everything went to chaos. She started helping herself to the little bottle of liqueur from the minibar, but not after promising she'd pay me back for everything once this had all blown over. I had no reason to disbelieve her at the time. I mean, I felt we had kind of established a bond of some sorts. I abstained from drinking myself though, because I thought I'd be driving back to the apartment pretty soon. I asked her if she was good to wait on her own while the cops drove out to her, but she asked if I'd stay and keep her safe. She also made the point that if her boyfriend found that blood on my apartment door, he'd know she'd been there and try to attack me or worse. To be honest, I thought it was a pretty good point at the time. I hadn't seen the blood myself, but she was so covered in it I just believed her when she said some had to be on my door. About an hour goes by and the cops still haven't shown up yet though. The motel rooms were arranged in a horseshoe shape, so we'd have seen them rolling into the parking lot if they had. I asked her to call them back to see what was going on. Obviously, this was a really urgent situation. I know there's basically no way for the boyfriend to find us, but I was really paranoid that he would figure it out somehow. That's when the inconsistency started though. She gave me some lame duck of a reply like, "I'm sure they'll be here soon." If that was me, I'd have called 911 again if they hadn't shown up in 10 minutes, so why was she so calm about this now? She was just completely cool with waiting for them for like an hour at this point. I put down the booze. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be. I sure couldn't just go back to my apartment with a psycho supposedly a few doors down. That's also about the same time though that I started checking out the amount of blood on her nightshirt. She had an oversized t-shirt and girls' boxers on. Like I said earlier, they were drenched with blood, but I also noticed some blood splattered too, little spots here and there. She had this cut over her eye and a nasty busted lip, but this was way too much blood for small wounds like those. I asked her if she had any other kind of injuries. Maybe an abdominal wound of some kind out of sight that might account for all this blood. She said no, and that it was all from that busted lip in her eye. I started to smell the nonsense. I asked her again what exactly had happened back in that apartment. She started getting weirdly defensive at this point. I was starting to think the abusive spouse story she told me the first time around was a little bit strange. I had no inkling of what was really going on though. That being said, I was tired of waiting for the cops to show, so I decided to call them back myself. All I had on me was my wallet, my phone, and my car keys, the only 3 things I'd had time to stuff into my pockets before fleeing. When I took out my phone to call the cops, she immediately interrupted me. "What are you doing?" I stated the obvious. I was about to call the cops back. She became very frantic. I don't know if it was the way she was looking at me, the way she spoke, or the way she immediately tensed up when I told her I was about to do that, but the mood in the room shifted completely. I asked her why not, and went back to dialing 911. At the same time the operator spoke down the line, I looked up and saw she had a knife in her hand. "Hang up now!" I did so. I'd never had a knife pulled on me at that point, and I can't overstate how terrifying it was. It wasn't even just the knife either. It was the overwhelming creepy sensation of knowing that all wasn't what it seemed. I wasn't hiding from the threat. I was with the threat. I'll be honest here, I basically begged her not to hurt me. To my relief, she promised she wouldn't as long as I drove her down to the Canadian border. Given this was in Detroit, the border wasn't all that far away. I didn't want to catch charges for aiding and abetting or whatever though, so I knew I had to think of something to stop this from happening. It's not like I couldn't tell the cops I'd been threatened or whatever, but I also knew the longer I spent in this person's company, the more chances I'd have of being stabbed. I told the girl I'd drive her down, but I needed to get something to eat first. I played it like I wanted to stop somewhere along the way, knowing she'd reason me down to getting something delivered from a 24-hour joint. She also stated she'd be the one going down to pick up the food, as she didn't want me having the chance to sound the alarm. That's where she messed up though. She didn't seem to realize, to my infinite belief, that I could order from DoorDash and put something in the notes as well. I put a note in the order about needing the driver to call the cops for an emergency. My whole plan hinged on the driver reading this, but thank God they did. I was even able to show her the order without bringing up the notes section that mentioned needing 911 immediately. The cops played it perfectly too. They showed up without any lights or sirens on, didn't park in the lot, and walked up to the motel room without being spotted from the window. Then they knocked on the door, just like they were a delivery driver. When she walked over to open it up, boom, they had a gun and taser drawn on her before she even knew what was happening. She had the knife tucked in the back of her boxers, but the cops were wise to her drawing on them. She hit the floor hard after they slammed her with the taser. Turns out they'd been looking for her because she was the abusive partner who'd stabbed her boyfriend almost to death before finding some poor schmuck, i.e. me, to drive her down to the border. The dude had almost bled to death in their shared apartment, but managed to crawl to another neighbor's place to get help. You should have seen the sheer amount of blood in the hallway when I got back to my building. The whole place was crawling with cops and forensic gear. I thought I might have to drive over to a friend's place to stay the night, but they had that section of the corridor closed off, so I could still get to where I lived. The cops came to my apartment in the morning to take my statement down and fill me in with what had happened. That's how I found out exactly what the deal was. This was 100% the craziest and most frightening thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Just the fact I was part of something like this seems completely surreal to me. The thing that sticks out to me the most is how easily I swallowed her nonsense story at first. How I thought I was helping someone I knew, someone I could trust, when in reality, one wrong move and I might not be around to tell you all of this. When I was back in college, I used to work nights at my uncle's motel, just outside of Baton Rouge. It was a pretty sweet gig for the most part. I was already a total night owl during the summers anyway, so instead of just staying home with my parents and getting on their nerves, being bored stiff during the midnight hours, I got to watch movies, read comic books, order takeout, and get paid for the whole damn thing. I remember those times with tons of nostalgia, to be honest, but every so often, I think about this one night where I happened upon one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. It might also even be the creepiest thing I'd ever heard of, too, mainly because of what it entailed and how many unanswered questions it left me with. It started with the motel's fire alarm going off. The fire alarm automatically alerted the fire department, so officially speaking, all they had to do was make sure all the guests evacuated properly. Unofficially, though, it was always an unwritten rule that whoever was on duty would try their damnedest to put out the fire before the whole frickin' place burned down. So that's exactly what I did. Once I saw the smoke billowing out of one of the rooms, I ran right there with my fire extinguisher. I kicked open the door and was relieved when I saw the fire appeared to basically be only in one small area in the corner of the room. I let rip on that thing with my extinguisher. Within a couple of seconds, the fire was out and I'd saved the day. Obviously, I hadn't paid much attention to what else was going on in the room, and the fact that there was no one in it didn't really faze me. I figured they had evacuated like everyone else. My uncle had already been alerted of the fire, and he was ringing the motel's phone like crazy. Boy, did I feel like a real hero, telling him I'd basically saved his entire income by putting out the fire before it could spread. He asked me to check on the actual damage before the fire department showed, which was going to take a while. Hence why he always asked me to be Johnny on the spot with an extinguisher if there was ever a fire. So I did as I was told, heading back up to the room while reassuring the parking lot's congregation of guests that everything was perfectly fine. The fire was already out. It was only when I got back to the room that I realized this fire appeared to have been set in one of the small metal trash cans in each room. Somebody had obviously filled the thing with God knows what, then set the thing on fire before trying to flee. About that moment, I was thinking, well, why the hell would someone do that? As I looked around the environment more, I realized that someone had arranged a bunch of stuff around this room. It was all clothes, all kids' clothes. Interspersed among them were a bunch of what looked like child's drawings. When I checked out what the drawings were of, I realized it was not just the fire department that should be on their way. The cops needed to get here too. The drawings were all of kids in cages, sad or crying, with big angry-looking grown-ups towering over them. Another was what seemed to be a kid crying over a dead child, while the people around them laughed. They were so horrific that despite the heat and smoke still circulating in the room, I felt a chill go down my spine. I immediately went to call the cops, then checked who was booked into the room, and most importantly, if there were any children booked in there too. There was just one guy's name in there, Cameron Odell. So what was this lone guy doing with all these child's clothes? The drawings were already horrifying, but it wasn't out of the question that an adult could have drawn them for whatever reason. The clothes, though, those were a different story. Right after the fire department arrived and they were checking the room over to confirm it was safe for the other guests to head back to theirs, I asked the group of guests in the parking lot if there was a Cameron Odell among them. No one spoke up or raised a hand, and no one by that name or any other name booked another room after everything died down. I'm guessing whoever was calling themselves by that name, probably a fake one, had already long fled following the fire. The cops showed up a short while after the fire department did, and I showed them everything I'd found along with the booking under the guy's name. Officially, their investigation would involve looking for potential arson, but the cops told me they'd be looking into all these things I'd found too, if they ever caught the guy who tried to set the room on fire. That was pretty much the last I heard of it. The first few weeks that followed, I kept asking my uncle if they'd caught the guy. Each time the answer was the same, no. I tried telling him about my discoveries, but all he seemed to care about was the damage to the room itself. Besides, I was his hero, having put the fire out and all, so whenever the subject came up, all I got was a slap on the back and a "that's my boy." It was hard to get any major details. What I'm left here with is a bunch of unanswered questions and half-baked theories as to what this guy was trying to do. There's one in particular that really sits with me. If the guy had a bunch of kids locked up somewhere, or if it was him trafficking children and he was trying to dispose of the evidence or something, that was a really dumbass way to go about it. Or maybe he was someone that had once been abused and was trying to draw attention to it in some way. Obviously, there's a lot to unpack here, but I really don't know what else to make of this creepy situation. I feel there's a deep, dark backstory to the whole thing, but I might never know what it is. Maybe in the years to come, the truth will come out, and I'll find out just what a crucial incident that motel fire was. Or maybe it'll remain a mystery forever, like so many other things in life. This is not my story as much as it is my mom's. She used to work at a motel in California back in the 80s. Anyway, one day a guy shows up to book a room. I'm going to just refer to this guy as the guest, since we don't know his actual name. My mom got assigned to clean his room on the daily, but as time went by, she noticed he always had the "Do Not Disturb" sign up on his room. Even a week into his stay, she'd never once had a chance to go inside and clean. This didn't really bother them too much though. The way my mom tells it, the guy was always super nice and friendly whenever he passed by someone or bumped into any of the cleaning staff, always apologizing for the trouble and telling them he'd just clean it up himself. If it saved them some work, they weren't exactly going to complain about it. Anyway, there came a point where the guy had not been seen for a few days on end, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign was not on the door anymore either. Everyone figured he just checked out, and they'd be able to clean the room again. It's a given that my mom was assigned to the room just like a month before. It came down to her to head over to clean it. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her immediately. She couldn't figure out what it was at first, but she continued to survey the room. Contrary to the guest's previous assurances, it was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a party, even though she was pretty sure no one else had ever gone into the room beside the guest. My mom was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track down where it was coming from. As she followed it further in, she could tell now it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet door, there was nothing but a wet-looking cardboard box on the ground. The smell then got way more intense, and she could tell it was coming from whatever was inside that box. She had a strong suspicion the guest had been using it to go to the bathroom in, so the last thing she wanted to do was look inside. Instead, she put on some gloves and covered up her nose and mouth, then picked the thing up to throw it into the trash. Only that's when she felt just how heavy it was. Way heavier than if there were just some feces inside or something. It was only when one of the other cleaning ladies smelled the same smell that they straight up yelled to call the cops right now. Apparently, a few years before, that very same cleaning lady had found a dead body in one of the rooms. Someone with a heart attack and a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door. It took almost 2 weeks before they went in to investigate, and she knew it was the exact same kind of rotting smell, definitely not coming from anything else but a decaying body. They called the cops to come take a look at it. The cops showed up and cut open the box with everyone watching. The officer looked up to his partner with a numb expression, saying, "Call the coroner." We're going to 419. Someone had to explain to my mom that that code number was a code for dead body, only it wasn't the whole body in there. That much was obvious because the box was way too small to hold an entire body. It turned out to be someone's decapitated head. I don't really know any more details than that. It happened almost 40 years ago now, and I couldn't find any internet archive stuff before I wrote this up. My mom said there was some talk of the head belonging to a call girl who had gone missing a few weeks before. They gave all the guy's info to the cops, but apparently that didn't help at all. The credit card was stolen, and the guy had used the same name on the card. Imagine being that person whose credit card got stolen, though. One day you think you've just lost it or something, and then suddenly the cops show up accusing you of having murdered someone. My mom stayed working at the motel for a year afterward, and only quit when she met my dad and moved into his place up in Vallejo. That story always kept me from ever wanting to work in a hotel or a motel or anything like that, no matter how desperate for money I get. I think I'd have to be very, very desperate to work somewhere you might see the darkest sides of human nature.